and welcome to Get the Table, another wrestling roundtable discussion podcast with myself, Adam Wilborn, and the Dadley boys of WhatCulture here to discuss another burning wrestling issue. And today we're here to talk about how WWE destroyed AEW's growth. And the sort of catalyst for this, Sige, is the fact that around a year ago, we're heading towards All Out. Obviously, Punk's just signed with AEW. There's a speculation about Danielson and Cole that obviously showed up on that show. On the other side, WWE are just a mess, if we're perfectly honest. And I believe in the road to All Out, Dynamite beat Raw a couple of times in the demos. Since then, they have obviously gone in very different, well, not very different directions, but Raw has returned to doing very well for itself. 2 million viewers recently, and it feels like AEW's viewers, whilst remaining relatively steady and still doing, decently in the ratings and the demos, obviously still number one. Feels like it's stagnated a bit. Is that fair? What happened?
Yeah, ultimately, this time last year, or about a few weeks removed from All Out, it did feel like the paradigm was actually shifting. AEW had handily defeated NXT in the Wednesday Night War, and the hype around the arrivals of Punk, Bryan Danielson, and Adam Cole informed this incredible ratings challenge of the flagship program. And I think a lot of people just thought, right, well, this could be it. AEW could consistently beat WWE. Unthinkable post-2001, but it is in fact happening, or could be happening consistently, and then it simply didn't. I think this is a fascinating subject, and I've kind of arrived at my own personal theory, and there's no correct answer. There's lots of conflicting debate about it. It's wrestling discourse. This is how we thrive, and this is the thing that we resent but can't help but get amongst. My personal theory, and it's just that, is the theory, is that I think, right, when Punk, Danielson, and Cole were all rumored, the summer of 2021, AEW's product was white hot. The fact that they just returned in front of like rabid, white hot live fans really accentuated how hot it was. And I just think that Punk, Danielson, and Cole were like symbolic of the biggest stars are jumping. You've got the guy who never wanted to come back to this product, because why wouldn't he? It's so white hot. And I just think that the people who latched onto AEW Dynamite on the wave of just goodwill, euphoria, all the rest of it, might have thought that, right, well, you've got the ultimate roster now. Let's see that roster interact with itself to the fullest potential. Dream Match City, incredible long-term programs, all the rest of it. That's not how Tony Khan books. He's a very patient booker. One of his foremost TV formulas is established name star versus either upstart indie prodigy rookie like Daniel Garcia, solid to very good mid-card hand like a Bobby Fish or a Tony Nese, or really respected veteran like a Dustin Rhodes type. That's the vast majority of Tony Khan's TV matches. This incredible roster hasn't even begun to interact with itself, and I think Tony Khan's patient, slow burn approach is possibly becoming a little too patient, because it's almost like anachronistic. The days of name star versus squash match guy belong to another century, and WWE for literally all of the 21st century hasn't done a rotating cast as a fixed roster of name stars. Even if they're not that over, the TV appeal of those graphics are, you're going to get guys who are on the show every single week in prominent positions, wrestling each other. And even though a lot of WWE fans get worked when prior to the Triple H era, so many of these matches ended in DQ. So many, or naff finishes, or countouts, or getting disqualified for kicking too much ass. Nonetheless, they were presented, the WWE fans, matches between name acts that the audience had been familiar with. Is AEW's slow burn approach too patient? Do they, in fact, ask fans to infer too much from who these guys are? I don't know, but I just think there's something in the fact that AEW doesn't do dream matches weekly. I think the rotating cast confuses people, quite frankly. It shouldn't, but some people are thick, quite frankly. There's always the argument as well that good wrestling and good things aren't necessarily the most popular. Like Breaking Bad was never as big as The Big Bang Theory. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. It doesn't get the ratings of The Big Bang Theory. Obviously, one of those shows is significantly better than the other, but it has a darker tone and a niche appeal, and maybe that philosophy extends towards professional wrestling as well. Look, I much prefer AEW. I don't think that's up for debate, but maybe it's just not for everyone. Maybe it's too cute. Maybe the rotational cast is too much, and even for me, it is. Like, no disrespect to Mance Warner, and I thought you had a hell of a match with John Moxley on Rampage. But for me, when that match got announced, I was almost thinking, oh, you've killed this. Remember Jeff Cobb in February 2020? It felt like a seismic shock of, oh my God, this wrestling world has been sort of disrupted. You can have these dream matches. You can have these crazy jumps. And I just think Tony Khan has indulged himself. The bloated roster doesn't really feel like it's developing. It just doesn't really feel like as big as it could be. But then every time a quarterly pay-per-view comes around, you think, oh, it was all worth it. Those few weeks of Dynamite where every match was predictable, which itself is kind of another problem as well. It was all worth it because this pay-per-view was so spectacular, right? But then you get 4 weeks after the pay-per-view and you think, oh, I'm a bit bored of all these match graphics, to be perfectly honest.
The irony of all this, of course, Hamlet, is we're talking about this now, and we're talking about dream matches. We are recording this hours ahead of Dynamite, where the world title's on the line.
We look like total mugs, even more so than usual.
Well, we've got a good 24 hours before the ratings come out for Dynamite, and it obviously blows this entire podcast out the wall.
It'll do a 0.33. No, it will.
It's a valid point, though, isn't it, that the Sidge makes there, and that when we look across, when people saw, as he mentions there, Punk, Cole, Danielson, and I could sit here and list many, many more names that have been brought in that I think all of us would have agreed, as much as we think there's a bloated roster within AEW, you can't pass on signing certain members that have been brought in the last 12 months. But it's fair to say that I think a lot of us thought that a lot of these people were going to be game changers and were going to take it not just past Raw, but maybe even to challenge something like SmackDown.
Yeah, a problem with and it like everything Cedric said there is correct about it's like Tony Khan's patience, for example. That was a key word there about how patient he is about him wanting to tell long-term stories. But there is, to simplify all of that, there was a developing problem with obvious winner versus obvious loser. Now, that was never a problem in Vince McMahon's WWE because, and they said it themselves, wins and losses didn't matter. So it didn't matter if you had an obvious winner or loser because they were telling you almost instantly after the match was finished that the result was like matterless anyway. Neither was ideal. Ideally, you want all the stars meeting in matches that do matter. We've said for years, and it was nice to see AEW bring this back to the forefront with pay-per-view buy rates, that wrestling is a star-driven industry, more than a brand, more than an ethos or a promoter. It's a star-driven industry. Your pro wrestling stars should be the reason why you tune into a wrestling show or why you emotionally invest. And it was nice that AEW was able to bring back, for example, a conversation that John Moxley is a draw, ratings, buy rates, and the like. That was a nice chat to have back because WWE had led with brand first all these years. I would argue that we find ourselves in a situation currently to relate to like the start of this podcast again, as you say, like Moxley and Punk, by the way, flies in the face of this obvious winner, obvious loser. That's why it's so hot, and that's why it stands out.
It's a rule-proven exception.
It is, as is, to be honest, the very booking of it, because the patients should have suggested this was going to be a pay-per-view main event. So this kind of flies in the face of a few of Tony Khan's typical booking habits. But yeah, WWE at the moment, oddly enough, despite AEW signing a bunch of wrestlers over the last year or so, and many of them we would have said, case by case, sign him, case by case, sign her, bring them in, rather than thinking too much about the big picture, you would sign A, B, and C. Oddly, with Triple H taking over recently and almost the immediate impact of some of his pushes and some of his projects, it kind of feels like WWE have signed stars as well. Your enthusiasm was dulled for everybody, as per Vince McMahon's brand first philosophy and whatever entertained him that day. And I say that day because it could have been different in the morning to the evening, right? So there was no point engaging in anybody from 1 week to the next. You just had to keep your fingers crossed, we said it before, that the wrestlers you like would have a nice day at work. That was the extent of being able to emotionally invest. All of a sudden, after around 6 weeks, for all that Triple H has far greater changes to make if he's going to make WWE permanently good and functionally good all over again. What he has done is made Kevin Owens feel brand new, Tommaso Ciampa feel brand new. He kind of said without saying, forget about all that. I'm sorry, Dead was so useless, but I like this guy, and I like Kevin Owens. I like Kevin Owens. I like Sami Zayn. I like Bayley. I like women's wrestling in general. I like tag belts. I like secondary titles, and that's a bit like AEW's last summer. Instead of signing new stars, you've just been reminded that they were there all along, and there is something to that. It's WWE. Triple H's mandate will still be brand first, brand first. But for now, at least, in the short term, I think he's purposefully trying to obscure that. I think he's trying to tell you again to invest in stars. If you have a favourite, if you like Kevin Owens, stick with him. I've given you 3 good weeks, and I promise you good things are coming to this character because I've asked you to invest. Please invest and come along the journey with me. It's not as hot as signing people because there's something to, and AEW has reminded us of that, there's something to seeing somebody on the other channel. And Cody coming back to WWE is evidence that it works both ways as well. But I think for a good year, Triple H is going to have a grace period of like doomed wrestlers suddenly feeling like brand new stars. And he should indulge in that. Like, this is the one saving grace of taking over from such a busted flush like Vince McMahon.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that. You know, Raw this week did over 2 million viewers, and this wasn't just the first week of, you know, a Triple H era and just the intrigue and what have you. It was one of my favourite Raws of the year, if I'm perfectly honest. Did a 0.55 in the demo as well. And I think a lot of us, when we saw those Raw numbers dwindling, and that, a lot of that was, you know, maybe pandemic stuff as well, but I think we all agree that we got to a certain figure and we were like, that's it. It's never going to drop below that because that's the diehards. But we also saw, well, there's clearly this, you know, element of fans that are fickle or just have taste, that tune in and tune out. And if Dynamite can get them to just have a little bit of a watch, even 1 week, then that might change things.
Yeah. I mean, it's the thing with obviously the ratings is where it's helpful, I think, is that it was last week maybe where Dolph Ziggler and Theory as the Raw main event was used as a bit of a stick to beat the subjective take that WWE was a hotter product at the moment, because that is subjective. People can just, like, you might not watch WWE, so in your mind, AEW is the only hot product. This rating has somewhat made that objective. It has suggested that just a little bit of plotting, not even like long-term storytelling, just some storytelling, some plotting will reward your investment and get you coming back next week. And Triple H had a really hot start, and then it tailed off a little bit, and then out of nowhere they've come back. Maybe it's not out of nowhere. Maybe people are feeling like they can invest, and maybe this is 1 week. Maybe it'll just be an outlier, but maybe there'll be growth, you know? And I think the numbers have been helpful, I think, to remind you that I think more, and again, this is my own personal take, probably because I represent this, I think a lot of people still want to enjoy WWE. I think WWE absolutely burned masses and masses of its once core audience over the last decade. You know, we saw it wasn't so much them protesting about Daniel Bryan and Roman Reigns and Becky Lynch. It was about them not protesting at all. When crowds did come back, AEW was substantially hotter in the arenas because all that time in Dadleys' place, like, please stick with us. Look, we're giving. We want you back. Like Vince McMahon himself going, where the hell have you been? Like, there was like outward resentment as well as this inward one that has always existed. I think a lot of people didn't want to resent WWE. They wanted a reason. I was certainly like that with NXT. I was like, you know what? There's a WWE logo in the middle of that X, but I will stick with it because this feels like it's in service to me. So I think for the longest time, people have actually wanted to have the door back open to them. This might not last. This honestly might not last, but this is absolutely a grace period and one that Triple H should ride as long as he possibly can.
I have been kind of surprised by the amount of people, whether it be my friends or just people on social media, who are like, oh, am I going to get back into WWE now because there's this sudden wave of positivity around it? What do you make of WWE's ratings, Sidge, and this new era under Triple H? And how can AEW close the gap for you?
My thoughts on the ratings are that Triple H's WWE thus far is a bit of a monster of a rating success. I think there's obviously the fact that a lot of fans have thought, right, okay, new start, reset, my investment was burned. I've now been given a reason to tune back in. And there's a natural curiosity of what would a Vince-less WWE look like? And the Vince-less WWE looks like quite physical, rapid action, certainly removed from the dreaded methodical WWE norm. The stories are not blow away intriguing, but they're very functional, A to B. He's making the old things matter again. Look, hand on heart, it's not my favorite thing. I'm not blown away, truthfully, like this bone deep excitement where getting out, it's Sunday, nearly time for Raw. I'm not there yet. Might I ever be? I don't know. But a lot of people are really starting to think that, you know what, let's give this a shot. There's actually a reason to invest. And if you look at WWE's product on television right now, a lot of it makes sense. I don't necessarily think that should be this incredible thing to shout about, but it makes sense. The action feels hotter, more expressive, louder. The noise is creeping up in those arenas, and it was dead for about 3 years. That's not just including the pandemic, obviously. And it looks like the biggest game in town. And the wrestlers are obviously having more fun. The stories are making more sense. The honeymoon period is there, and it just feels like it still might just be a honeymoon period. You might get 5 minutes on extra match, and people think, all right, I'm bored of this cheat code to filling out a 3-hour Raw. But it's very broad and basic and easy to understand. Like, I love poring over the small details of an AEW Dynamite, and particularly the Elite Saga, where you can recall things from 3 years ago. You can look at an expression from Hangman Page, and that hints towards his direction. And if you want the minutiae of great storytelling, you go and foreshadowing and all these wonderful devices for the hardcore nerd fan, they're there in AEW. WWE is broader and possibly at this point has way more mass appeal. The casual audience is a myth. There are not 6 million Midian fans held over from 2001 just waiting for Midian and Tits and the Attitude Era to come back. The Attitude Era never ended realistically until 2008. Tonally, those products were exactly the same. But there is a mass appeal and there's an audience to get, and kind of Triple H is doing it at the moment with a broad, blockbuster, mediocre to solid to very good product, the baseline for which is, if nothing else, been raised to solid. And maybe that's enough for people. As for how AEW challenges again, look, I think that it works for me. I love being patient. I love the slow burn. I love pay-per-view weeks where you just can't wait for the show to arrive. But maybe in an era of just instant gratification where you're just looking at your phone the whole time, maybe it's just a little bit too patient and slow burn, and maybe it is congested, and maybe I have been asked to invest in too many acts, and maybe there is a bit of a problem in building. Because if you're building waves and waves and waves upon talent, the generation of Sammy Guevara and Darby Allin, where are they realistically, right? People were saying, Sammy Guevara versus Darby Allin at Revolution 2020 was so good, the characters were so hot, that might be an AEW pay-per-view main event in 2025. That was the take at the time. Is that ever going to happen at this point? No. I think Tony Khan's been greedy, excessive, indulgent with his recruitment approach. And maybe at this point, like, I understand one of the strategic reasons why he's leaving so many matches on the table, because he can go to Warner in his negotiations for the rights fee and say, look what I can guarantee you for the next 5 years on your television program, because this is what I've deliberately, strategically not done yet. Maybe when the rights fee comes in, if and when it does, he can go, right, Punk and Omega, Danielson versus Punk, and all these other dream matches on TV at a far faster clip than we've been getting, because I just don't think something like CM Punk versus QT Marshall or Lee Moriarty, both very good performers in their own right. Lee Moriarty could be something special, but that's just not really clicking with not the casuals, but the same mass audience as WWE. Maybe this patient building approach is sort of antiquated, quite frankly.
Amber, for you, how do AEW recover their growth?
Well, this is the thing. I think like the TV rights fees conversation, like, is going to be, well, not the conversation, but the rights fees negotiations are going to be really interesting, because when they got their last extension, like, Dynamite was this young, nascent, hot product that was theoretically only getting hotter before the pandemic struck. Now, in one sense, that was really fortunate for AEW, because imagine having to go to the table with half a year at Daly's place and all the uncertainty. They got the deal. But I think that's a great point. I think what he's armed with is a bunch of these dream matches. However, to counter that, when you have a roster this big, you should kind of always be having new dream matches anyway. It shouldn't be about saving. It should be like, well, I've signed these people, so I don't have to save. It's the promise of the best of both worlds, even if it's unrealistic to deliver that. I would like to see something about the planning and the careful strategy of Tony Khan means occasionally, I wouldn't say it's confusion where, oh, well, like, who's this from? Like, I haven't seen them in 6 weeks. It doesn't feel quite as spontaneous as it might do. If somebody just really gets over, then sometimes in wrestling, you have to go with them. And I'm not saying that you should divert in some like crazy direction, but somebody should become way more profiled. Ricky Starks is currently the subject of a major singles push and a babyface turn. This is a singles push that between the three of us on podcasts, and I know plenty of people out there, have basically been calling for 2 years. There was months where Starks was barely even getting on Dynamite. And
he was injured for a lot of it.
But there was like that. He's one example of this sort of thing happening all the time. There are like wrestlers.
Kingston.
Yeah, like wrestlers have periods of time where they're featured. And it's not whether or not they're over or not, because it's rare that somebody, like certainly on Dynamite, less so on Rampage, but certainly on Dynamite walks out and isn't over to a degree. But I think sometimes, and this doesn't really happen in WWE because they haven't been spoiled with quite as varied and diverse a roster. I think sometimes if there was a guy that you really like, then you just want to see them week after week after week, not see them once. And this is a women's division problem. You want to see them week after week. You don't want to see them and then, well, they're gone for 6 weeks. That's not going to make you want to tune in next week or the week after if they're not there, if these people you like crap example now, but once Steve Austin was over, he was opening Raw every single week at the top of the hour. AEW don't necessarily book like that, but in terms of featuring the acts, that little, he's not on the show, but he's backstage with Tony Schiavone. Maybe it's not enough. Maybe there does need to be that little bit more spontaneity mixed in with the long-term planning. It's what we're asking for is utopia still, ultimately, and it's whether
they did promise it.
Yeah, and it's whether or not they can continue to try and achieve it.
It's going to be very interesting to see how this goes forward. Do let us know your thoughts in the comments section below, including how much this is going to age like milk following the World Title match on Dynamite tonight. You can also like, share, subscribe to WhatCulture Wrestling wherever you get your podcast from. Continue the conversation with us on Twitter at WhatCulture WWE, where you can follow all three of us. You can follow Michael Hamflett at
Michael Hamflett.
You can follow the writer of the brilliant Becoming Elite, The Rise of AEW, Michael Sidgwick at
M. Sidgwick.
Available on Amazon right now. You can follow me at Adam Wilborn. Follow us all at WhatCulture WWE. But for now, this has been Get the Table. My thanks to the Dadley Boys. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you soon.